The air was heavy. The sound of hammers echoed in the distance, and the cameras were rolling on what would become one of the most intense moments in modern film. The crucifixion scene had begun. The Roman soldiers moved into position. The wooden cross was lifted high, and the crowd of extras gathered with silence hanging over them like a storm cloud. But just when the moment reached its peak, Jonathan Roumie, the man portraying Jesus, raised his voice and stopped everything. In an instant, the set froze. Crew members stared at each other. Extras dropped out of character. No one knew why. What could make an actor halt a scene so important, so dramatic, and so carefully prepared? This was no ordinary interruption. It was something far deeper, something that left people whispering long after the cameras stopped rolling. Jonathan Roumie is not just an actor. To many people around the world, he has become a living image of Jesus through his role in The Chosen. His performance is not built on shallow drama or Hollywood glamour. It is built on respect, faith, and an understanding that his role carries enormous weight. For millions who watch him, he is more than a man in costume. He is the face that helps them connect to the greatest story ever told. That responsibility is not light, and Jonathan knows it. When he first stepped into the role of Jesus, many wondered how he would approach it. Would it be just another acting job? Would he treat it like any other role in a career of performances? The answer revealed itself quickly. Jonathan did not separate his craft from his faith. He brought both together. On set, his focus was not on how to appear convincing, but on how to remain truthful. Every look, every gesture, every line he delivered was meant to carry the weight of centuries of belief. People who have worked with him often describe the same thing. They say that when Jonathan is in character, it feels less like acting and more like a sacred presence. Extras on the show have shared stories of feeling moved to tears just standing near him as he delivered lines from scripture. Crew members say the atmosphere often shifts when he walks onto the set dressed as Jesus. It is as if the line between performance and reality blurs. This reputation made the crucifixion scene something everyone anticipated. With awe and nervous energy, it was not just another day of filming. It was the moment when the story reached its most painful and powerful point. The crew prepared for months. The actors studied every detail. The set was built to capture the harshness and cruelty of Roman execution. Yet at the heart of it all was Jonathan Roumie. He carried the burden of making the audience believe in the suffering, the sacrifice, and the love that defined the crucifixion. The challenge was not simply technical. It was spiritual. How do you recreate one of the most sacred and devastating events in history without reducing it to just a performance? How do you step into the role of Jesus at his final hour and treat it with the reverence it deserves? For Jonathan, the answer was simple but demanding. He would not allow the crucifixion scene to be shot like any other moment. It had to be different. It had to be real in a way that went beyond the cameras. And so when the day came, when the sun was beating down, when the cross stood tall against the sky, Jonathan Roumie carried more than a role. He carried a responsibility to truth. That responsibility would lead him to do something that no one on set expected. It would lead him to bring everything to a halt. The set was alive with tension before a single camera was switched on. It was not the kind of tension that comes from nerves or pressure. It was the kind that comes when everyone knows they are about to step into something bigger than themselves. The crucifixion is not a normal scene. It is the heart of the story. It is the moment when history, faith, and human emotion collide. And that weight pressed down on everyone standing under the burning light of the afternoon sun. The crew had been preparing for days. Rough wooden beams had been carried in and placed into the ground. Sand and dirt had been raked to look like the dry soil of ancient Jerusalem. Extras were gathered in long robes, their faces painted with sweat and dust to match the setting. Roman soldiers stood ready with armor gleaming and whips in hand. Every detail mattered. Every sound, every shadow, every movement had been planned to capture the raw truth of the crucifixion. Yet the air itself carried something that no camera could capture. Silence, thick and unshakable, hovered over the set. People whispered less. Movements were slower. Even those who had spent years working on film sets felt a stillness they could not explain. It was as if the story itself had reached out from history and settled among them. For the extras playing the crowd, it no longer felt like acting. Their eyes followed the cross with a mixture of dread and awe. Jonathan Roumie stood at the center of it all, robed in simple cloth, his body already marked with makeup to resemble the wounds of scourging. His face was calm but focused. He knew that once the cameras rolled, he would no longer just be Jonathan. He would be the Christ, carrying the weight of the cross and the eyes of millions who would one day watch this scene unfold. To carry that role was not only a challenge of performance, but a surrender of self. When the assistant director called everyone to take their places, the crowd pressed closer, soldiers raised their spears, and the cross was dragged into view. The sound of wood scraping against stone cut through the quiet. Some extras flinched, others lowered their heads. It was not a stage prop anymore. It was a symbol, and its presence demanded reverence. As Jonathan prepared to take his position, many of the crew members found themselves holding their breath. They had filmed battles, miracles, and dramatic sermons, but this was different. This was the crucifixion. It was not just the climax of a show. It was the retelling of a sacrifice that had shaped the lives of billions for 2,000 years. The responsibility of that truth pressed down like the weight of the cross itself. And then the cameras began to roll. The Roman soldiers moved forward. The crowd began to shout. The sound of lashes cracked the air. Jonathan stumbled beneath the cross, dust rising around him, sweat and pain etched into his face. The scene had started, and in that moment, everyone on set felt that they were no longer part of a film. They were part of something sacred. But just as the scene reached its most harrowing point, the moment that would shake everyone present arrived. Jonathan Roumie raised his head, looked around, and spoke the words that stopped it all. The cries of the crowd were echoing. The soldiers were shouting, and the cross loomed high as the cameras captured every movement. Dust clung to the air, sticking to the sweat on faces, turning the scene into something that felt painfully real. Jonathan Roumie, bent beneath the weight of the cross, stumbled forward as Roman soldiers barked orders and shoved him to the ground. Every eye was fixed on him, every heart tightening as the scene unfolded. And then, just as the moment seemed to pull everyone fully into the reality of the crucifixion, it happened. Jonathan lifted his head, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His eyes swept over the crowd, then to the soldiers, then to the cameras. The set was alive with noise, but his voice cut through it with sharp clarity. Stop. His tone was not loud, but it carried power enough to silence the chaos in an instant. The soldiers froze mid-step. The extras fell quiet, their cries fading to nothing. Even the sound of the wind seemed to pause. The entire crucifixion had come to a standstill because the man playing Jesus had spoken. At first, confusion spread across the faces of the crew. Was this part of the performance? Was he improvising? No one could tell. The director looked up from behind the monitor. The assistant director turned to the sound team, and the extras exchanged uncertain glances. The soldiers, still gripping their whips and spears, remained frozen in place. Jonathan slowly straightened, the cross still pressing down on him, and raised his hand. His expression was not that of an actor stepping out of character. It was that of a man who had felt something shift in the very air around him. His silence stretched for several seconds, but those seconds felt eternal. The entire crew waited, sensing that whatever he was about to say would not be ordinary. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried both pain and reverence. He explained that the scene, as it was unfolding, had become too mechanical, too focused on action and not enough on meaning. He said the crucifixion was not just another part of a script. It was the moment that defined love, sacrifice, and redemption. He could not go forward until everyone present remembered what they were truly representing. Those words pierced through the crew more deeply than any director's instructions ever could. Extras who had been playing the part of a mocking crowd lowered their heads in silence. Soldiers who moments before had been shouting with rage stood motionless as if ashamed. Even those who had spent decades on film sets whispered to one another that they had never seen anything like this. It was not a breakdown, not a mistake, and not a hesitation. It was a pause born from conviction. Jonathan was not halting the crucifixion scene because of discomfort or technical error. He was halting it because the sacred weight of that moment demanded more. The cameras could wait, the schedules could wait, but the crucifixion could not be treated as just another scene. That interruption would change the atmosphere of the entire set. The crew did not simply reset their equipment and start again. They carried with them a new sense of reverence, a sobering awareness that what they were portraying was not just history, but holy ground. The silence after Jonathan's words was unlike anything the set had experienced before. Cameras still hummed, boom mics swayed in the wind, but no one moved. It was as though the air itself refused to let the moment slip away. Jonathan stood there, shoulders heaving under the rough wood of the cross, his body marked with the wounds of makeup. But his eyes carried something beyond performance. They were steady, intense, and filled with the kind of conviction that makes people listen whether they want to or not. He broke the silence not with a director's cue, not with lines from the script, but with words that felt like they were carried from a deeper place. He told the cast and crew that what they were recreating was not just history. It was the most sacred act of sacrifice the world had ever known. He said that to play it like any other scene would strip away its meaning. It was not just about nailing the timing, or getting the right angle, or making sure the crowd looked convincing. It was about honoring the reality of what Jesus endured. Jonathan explained that the crucifixion was not a spectacle. It was suffering. It was not simply drama. It was love in its most painful form, and he could feel that the energy on set was drifting away from that truth. In that moment, he confessed, he felt the need to stop. Not because he could not go on, but because he could not allow the crucifixion to be treated like a piece of entertainment. It demanded reverence, respect, and a brokenness of heart that could not be faked. As he spoke, his voice shook with emotion, but it never lost strength. He looked at the extras, who had been hired to shout and mock, and told them to remember that the real crowd at Calvary had been filled with confusion, anger, and fear. He looked at the soldiers and reminded them that they were representing men who carried out orders with no idea they were nailing the Son of God to a cross. He looked at the cameras and spoke of the millions who would one day watch this scene, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of the cost of their faith. The weight of his words sank in. Some extras wiped tears from their cheeks. A few crew members quietly put down their equipment, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of the moment. The director himself leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly, realizing this was no longer just a film set. It had become a place of worship, of remembrance, of something holy. Jonathan finished by saying that he could not carry on until everyone present understood the sacredness of what they were portraying. He asked them not to act, but to enter the reality of it, to feel, even for a moment, the heaviness of that sacrifice. Only then, he said, could the cameras roll again. Those words shifted the entire atmosphere. The mocking cries that had filled the air just minutes before were replaced with silence and reverence. The extras stood taller, the soldiers adjusted their grip, and the crew took their places with a new sense of purpose. Jonathan had halted the crucifixion not to delay it, but to remind everyone that they were standing on holy ground. The pause Jonathan called for did more than stop the scene. It broke through the walls of performance and pulled everyone into a moment of raw humanity. In film, people are trained to reset quickly, to jump back into place when a take is interrupted. But this was different. No one rushed, no one hurried. Instead, the cast and crew stood as if rooted to the ground, stunned by what had just happened. For the extras in the crowd, many of whom had been told to shout insults and jeer as Jesus stumbled under the cross, the shift was immediate. They had started the day thinking of their role as simple background noise. Just another paycheck. Just another day in costume. But when Jonathan stopped and reminded them of the truth behind their cries, several of them lowered their eyes. A few admitted later that they could not even bring themselves to raise their voices again in the same way. Their insults had felt like daggers, and now, with the weight of his words hanging in the air, they realized how close they had come to mocking something holy. The Roman soldiers, dressed in heavy armor and holding spears and whips, also felt the weight of his reminder. Some of them had been laughing between takes, treating the day as another piece of acting work. But after Jonathan's interruption, their faces changed. They gripped their weapons more carefully, no longer careless actors, but men aware they were representing the cruelty of an execution. One soldier later shared that he felt a chill run down his spine when Jonathan's eyes locked on him, as if he had been seen for more than just his costume. The crew behind the cameras were not untouched either. Cameramen who had been focused only on framing the perfect shot now blinked back tears. The sound team, who had been worried about levels and background noise, suddenly found themselves shaken, realizing they were listening not to an actor, but to a man who was carrying something sacred. Even the director, known for his composure and command on set, sat speechless, letting the silence linger far longer than usual because he, too, was caught in the depth of the moment. One by one, people admitted they had never seen anything like it. Some had worked on dozens of films, some had acted in countless scenes, but none of them could remember a time when a performance had turned into something that felt almost like a prayer. A few of the extras cried quietly, others bowed their heads, and more than one crew member whispered later that they had felt as though they were standing in the shadow of something holy. The atmosphere was transformed. The dust, the heat, the cries, and the silence all fused into something that no script could write. What had begun as a day of filming became an experience people would carry with them long after the cameras were packed away. For Jonathan, it was about truth. For everyone else on that set, it became a memory etched so deeply that even years later, when asked, they would say, "I have never seen anything like that in my life." Imagine standing there, the heat of the sun pressing down on your shoulders, the dust clinging to your skin, the shouts of a crowd all around you, their voices sharp and cutting, each word digging like a knife. You watch a man stumble beneath the weight of a cross, his body broken, his face streaked with sweat and blood. At first you remind yourself it is only a performance, it is just another scene. But then, in the middle of the noise, he raises his hand and commands silence. Everything stops, and in that silence, you realize something. You are not just watching. You are part of it. This is the effect Jonathan Roumie created that day. He turned a film set into something more than a workplace. For the extras, it became a confrontation with history. For the crew, it became a moment of reverence. And for anyone who would later hear the story, it became an invitation to look inward. Because the truth is, the Crucifixion was not a performance. It was not staged. It was not entertainment. It was the most brutal act of execution, turned into the greatest act of love. As you picture the scene, ask yourself, how would you have reacted? Would you have stood in the crowd and shouted like the others? Would you have carried out the orders of a soldier, blind to the truth of the man you were crucifying? Or would you have been like the few who stood at a distance, heartbroken, unable to stop what was unfolding before their eyes? These are not questions a camera can answer. They are questions for the soul. Jonathan's decision to stop the crucifixion scene was not just about accuracy, it was about honesty. He wanted everyone to remember that they were not reenacting a legend but entering into the weight of a sacrifice that still speaks today. That is why the moment moved people to tears. That is why silence spread like a blanket across the set. And that is why this story resonates far beyond the world of film. If you let yourself imagine being there, the pause Jonathan demanded becomes a mirror. It forces you to confront the reality of what the crucifixion means. It asks you whether you treat it as something distant, something safe, or whether you let it pierce you with the same raw force it pierced those who watched it 2,000 years ago. For some on that set, it was the first time they realized how real the crucifixion was. For others, it was a reminder of why they believed in the first place. And now, as you hear this story, that same question reaches out to you. What would you have felt if you were standing there, cross looming over you, silence holding you in place, and a man reminding you that this is not just a story, it is the cost of love? When the cameras finally rolled again after Jonathan's halt, something had changed. The shouts of the crowd were no longer just noise. They carried weight, trembling with the memory of what had just been said. The soldiers' movements were sharper, heavier, as if each strike of the whip cut through their own conscience. And Jonathan himself, carrying the cross, no longer looked like an actor portraying a role. He looked like a man embodying truth. The crucifixion scene unfolded with a depth no script could manufacture, because everyone involved had been reminded that they were not playing out fiction, but standing in the shadow of something eternal. That is the power of a single pause. In the rush of schedules and the mechanics of production, it is easy to forget why a story is being told. But Jonathan Roumie refused to let the crucifixion become just another scene. He reminded the world that this story is different. It demands reverence. It demands stillness. It demands hearts that are willing to be broken by the cost of love. His decision to halt everything was not for drama, not for attention, but to call those present back to the truth of what they were reenacting. And in doing so, he turned a film set into a place of worship. The echoes of that moment did not fade when the cameras shut off. Crew members carried it home. Extras remembered it long after their lines were done. And those who later heard the story were moved by the same silence that had fallen on the set. People said they had never seen anything like it. And perhaps that is the real miracle here. In a world where stories are told every day, Jonathan made sure this one was not treated like all the rest. And now, the story has reached you. You have heard how a single pause in a crucifixion scene became more than an interruption. It became a reminder. The question is no longer what happened on that set. The question is, what happens in your heart as you picture it? Do you feel the weight of that silence? Do you sense the truth of what was being honored? Or do you let it pass by as just another story in a crowded world of stories? If this moment stirred you, if it made you stop and think, then let it do more than move you. Share it. Speak about it. Let others feel what the cast and crew felt that day. Because this story is not just about a film or an actor. It is about the crucifixion itself, and the reminder that it was never meant to be entertainment. It was meant to change lives. Perhaps that is why Jonathan's portrayal of Jesus continues to reach millions, not because of flawless acting, not because of perfect cinematography, but because of his commitment to truth. And truth, when honored, has a way of breaking through cameras and screens to touch the heart directly. So as this story closes, ask yourself, what will you do with it? Will you walk away unchanged? Or will you carry the silence with you? The same silence that fell when Jonathan Roumie halted the crucifixion,